Thank you, Rod, and good evening, everyone. I'm just going to share my screen. Everyone can hopefully now see the PowerPoint.
Yep, perfect.
Okay. So as Rod said, I'm going to be talking about common cycling injuries and how we value a claim. We, apart from being lawyers, we're all cyclists as well. Some photographs of us in action. The bottom left-hand photograph, that's us at the Doddy charity cycle ride. I feel that was last year now. And these are some photographs of me cycling in lockdown as well. So first of all, just to clarify the difference between criminal law and civil law. And at Cycle Law Scotland, we focus on civil law. So with criminal law, that would be, for example, where the police would be involved if a driver is charged with careless driving or dangerous driving, as an example. And we focus on civil law. So we look at where there's been a negligent act, we look at making sure that we then pursue a claim for damages, which is also called compensation. We adhere to the personal injury compulsory protocol with an insurance company. So where there's been an incident involving a car and a cyclist, for example, we would then intimate a claim to the insurance company of the vehicle. The insurance company would then have a period of 3 weeks to note interest. And then following this, they have a period of 12 weeks in which to investigate liability and then provide their liability decision. With a claim for personal injury, there are two aspects to the claim. So there's the liability aspect, and then there's also what's called quantum. And quantum is the value of the claim. So with the value of the claim, there's the injury element, and there's also other elements. So if somebody's off work, then we can include the loss of earnings. If their bicycle is damaged, we can include that as well. If there's any travel costs or, for example, any cycling kit that's been damaged as well, that can all be included with what's called quantum. Some cycling injuries are listed there. They really do vary, and we deal with all injuries. So whether they are minor or if they are catastrophic, we do deal with all of them at Cycle Law Scotland. I'm going to be focusing on soft tissue injuries and also fractures. And a colleague of mine, Jodie, is going to be dealing with the more catastrophic injuries in a later webinar. So what we would do is, once you've made a good recovery from your injury, we would recover your medical records. We would then instruct a medical expert to meet with you for the purpose of providing a medical report. The medical report would provide a diagnosis and also a prognosis. And we instruct a vast range of medical experts, from A&E consultants to orthopedic consultants, even psychologists. We do instruct them all. And once we have a medical report, then we're then able to value your claim for injury. And we do that by looking at case law. So previous cases that have gone to court, we look at the awards for injuries they have received. And we also use what's called the Judicial College Guidelines. And that's a photograph of it on the left-hand side of the slide, the orange book there. And the book sets out the ranges of awards. So I'm now going to look at some cases of mine that I've dealt with, some cycling cases, and I'm going to look at the different injuries that each case suffered. The first one, I'm going to look at the psychological injury. And this relates to a case of mine. A cycling incident happened in Edinburgh city centre, and this was in February 2019. My client was cycling, approaching a junction where a passenger car door opened and collided with her, and she fell from her bicycle. She sustained facial injuries. She also sustained soft tissue injuries to her arms and her knees as well. Now, my client used to cycle to work daily in Edinburgh city centre. She used to also go on regular cycling holidays, and she also cycled in the Scottish borders as well. So cycling was a big, big part of her life, and she couldn't get back to cycling. She tried and she couldn't, and she ended up walking to work instead. So apart from instructing an accident emergency consultant, we also instructed a psychologist as well. And my client was diagnosed with specific phobia of cycling on the roads. And she was recommended treatment by way of CBT, which is cognitive behavioural therapy. And within the claim, we made sure that this treatment was covered for her, so she was able to access the treatment. And we looked at the Judicial College guidelines, and the range of award for the psychological injury she suffered was between around £3,000 to £6,000. And we also included the cost of the CBT sessions, which was about £130 a session. So the final settlement for this claim was just over £6,000, but that was for the injury and also to ensure that she had access to the treatment she required. And now look at this case of mine. This was a cycling incident in East Lothian, and this was in March 2019. I'll play the video of the incident first, and then I'll talk about the injuries afterwards. You'll see my client, the cyclist, coming from the left-hand side, and then you'll see a red car in this one. So this was quite a nasty injury my client suffered from. You can see that the car did come out and really did impact with my client there. My client sustained a fracture to his left knee, and he was discharged from hospital, and he had a brace on his knee and also crutches. So his mobility was severely restricted. I met with him shortly after he was discharged from hospital at his home, and he actually stayed in a 3-storey house. So his mobility was really limited to just one level. And I arranged for private physiotherapy for my client. Liability was admitted early on from the video footage, which was very important. I instructed an orthopaedic expert in this case due to the fracture that my client suffered from. And I looked at the Judicial College guidelines, and the range of award was between about £22,000 to £37,000. And settlement was agreed at £33,000 for this particular case. There were other elements to the claim as well. So when I say £33,000 for settlement, that's not just for the injury aspect, but that was for the whole claim. This was a case of mine. This was in the Meadows in Edinburgh, and my client was cycling, and as he went to stand up on his pedals, the crank arm snapped. You can see the photograph of it there on the right-hand side of the slide. It was defective, but liability was actually disputed in this case. My client sustained a fracture to his femur. He required surgery, and a metal rod was placed in his leg, and he was left with scarring as well as a result of the surgery. Private physiotherapy, my client received that in this case, and we instructed an orthopaedic expert. And my client made a good recovery, an 18-month recovery, and settlement was agreed at £22,500 in this particular case. Because liability was disputed, we did actually raise a court action in this one, but the defenders made an offer, which was a good offer, and we accepted that. And the range of award for this one, for the leg injury, was between about £16,000 to £26,000. Now going to look at facial injuries. This was a case of mine, happened in Barrows Road in Glasgow, and this was in November 2017. My client was cycling, and the driver's door opened as my client cycled past a car, and unfortunately his face actually went through the glass of through the window of the driver's door. My client sustained facial cuts and bruises. He had a chipped front tooth and also scarring to his cheek. We instructed an accident emergency report in this case, and liability was actually disputed, so we raised a court action again in this one, and the defenders made an offer which we accepted, just over £13,000. And with this case, the injury value ranged between about £7,000 to £8,000, but the most significant part really was the dental treatment, and that ranged between about £4,000 to £5,000, which was included within my client's claim. Looking at wrist fracture, this was a case of mine in Edinburgh. This was near Musselburgh. My client was approaching the junction when a car cut across his path. It caused him to fall from his bicycle. He sustained a fracture to his right dominant wrist, and he actually was employed as a chef. So his arm was in a cast for 2 months, and during that time, he wasn't able to work. So there was also a wage loss element to this claim as well. I instructed an orthopaedic expert in this case, and the recovery was between about 12 to 18 months. And using the guidelines, the award for his injury was just between about £9,000 to £10,000, and settlement was reached at this level. And now looking at shoulder injuries, this is probably one of the most common cycling injuries that I do see, and it's the nature of, unfortunately, falling off your bicycle. This particular case, this happened in the Bridge of Allen, and this was in September 2018, and it was as a result of a road defect, and you can see the defect there in the left-hand side of the slide there. Liability was admitted in this case by the local authority, and my client sustained dislocation to his right shoulder and his AC joint in his right shoulder. He required surgery to reconstruct his shoulder, and he was left with permanent restriction on lifting or moving above head height, and that was permanent. The range of the award ranged between about £11,000 to £18,000, and settlement was reached at £16,000 in this case. Restitutio ad integrum. Now, this is the whole purpose of compensation, and it is to restore an injured person as best as possible back to the place they were prior to the incident. And what to do if you are involved in an incident. What I would say is report the incident to the police, obtain the vehicle registration number if you can, obtain any witness details, take any photographs as well. And if the incident involves a road defect, for example, a pothole, take photographs if you can. And if you can't that day, go back, take some photographs, take some measurements. This is all really, really useful information. And if you have any queries, if you think you may have a claim or you're not sure about making a claim, we, of course, are more than happy to answer any questions. What I would say is sometimes maybe someone isn't sure about making a claim, they're not sure if their injury is bad enough. That really, really depends, because it may be okay at the time, but maybe you require some physiotherapy that will cost you some money. You maybe need some time off work as well. So there really are lots of elements to a claim, and it really is kind of fact sensitive, and we do look at every case individually. So if you have any queries at all, we'd be more than happy to answer. And I'm happy to answer any questions.
Excellent, Zara. Thank you for that. Quick trot through the kinds of cycling injuries which we see on a daily basis. I have, there's one question come in from Andrew as you were speaking. He was looking at the video of the East Lothian roundabout incident and was asking how we actually got access to that video. And also, is head cam footage permissible evidence?
So the dash cam footage came from a vehicle that was approaching the roundabout, and it was actually my client that provided that to me. So I think what happened there was the police obtained that, and that's how my client was able to then pass that over to me. Any dash cam, head camera, anything like that, any footage is really, really useful. And it is really useful for us because then we can pass that to an insurance company. And really, once they've seen the video footage, they can't then come back and dispute liability. In that particular case, you can see the car clearly impacted with our client. Yes, video footage can be used in court as well.
Excellent, thank you for that. Sharon's just thanking you for the presentation and telling us she's going to contact us as her son's been knocked off his bike. It's a shame that the police have been no real help, because often the police actually are helpful to us. It really depends on the circumstances, but we'll certainly help you, Sharon. Madeline's asking, what happens if the insurer does not respond within the 3-week period? It's actually longer than that, I think, isn't it? I'm currently in this situation. Is it law that they must respond within this time frame?
So yes, so the pre-action protocol, it is compulsory, and the time limits do say 3 weeks. So once the claim has been intimated to them, they are under duty to respond within 3 weeks. And what they do is they basically confirm, so they know interest and they confirm that they are the insurers and they are going to deal with the claim. And then that's when they then would start investigating liability. And then from then they have the 3-month period.
So, which is asking, is it law that they must respond in that time frame? I don't think it's a legal requirement. It's just a bad practice if they don't, because they're not adhering to the protocol within which they've signed up to support.
That's right. And then in theory, if they breach the protocol at any point, then we could then look at raising a court action because they've not adhered to that.
Madeline, I'm not sure who your solicitors are, but they should certainly be on the back of the insurer as well, trying to get a response, because I'm assuming they've intimated a claim to the insurer. If you're doing it yourself, I don't know, you want to give advice in terms of doing it yourself, Zara, from clients who have tried to do this themselves and then actually thought, wait a minute, I'll come actually and speak to the experts. What do you want to say about that?
I actually just had a client recently contact me, tried to do exactly that, tried to initially deal with it just directly with the driver, and then tried to deal with it in the insurance company and just wasn't getting anywhere. So he contacted me and now I'm representing him.
Excellent. Sandy is asking, does the same timeframes work for English law? Yeah, I believe so. I think the protocols across the UK, and isn't it England and Wales and Scotland?
I probably would have to double check that, Rod, before I can confirm that one. Obviously, it's just Scottish law that we deal with, but I would probably need to double check that. If it's not exactly the same, it would be very similar.
Okay. Just going back to Madeline's question, I was going to say something else actually in relation to that. When people do try and progress claims themselves, the difficulty they have is not just getting the response from the insurer, taking it seriously by them, which they should do, but they often don't. But it's also knowing or not knowing what the value of your actual claim is worth. So you're not really in a strong position to negotiate, are you?
No, an insurance company might give you a figure and say, would you take this amount? And you wouldn't know without some advice.
And what about how, so maybe people are concerned about employing lawyers because they're going to cost a lot of money. What's the position in relation to how they pay for your fees?
Yeah, so we work on a speculative basis, no win, no fee. So there's no upfront costs. And what we would do is at the end of a successful claim, we would deduct no more than 15% from the award for injury. So we wouldn't deduct any of our fee from the element of the claim. For example, your damaged bicycle, damaged cycling kit, you would get all that back in full. We'd only deduct our fee from the injury element.
Okay, another question in from Andrew. Who or what decides if an incident should be a civil criminal case? Seems amounts awarded. In fact, insurance picks up the cost, does not act as a deterrent to poor observation of drivers. not quite sure what you're saying. Andrew, do you want to clarify that? Who decides if an incident should be a civil, or maybe he's asking whether whether there should be an individual should potentially be charged by the police as opposed to the criminal justice side of things.
Yeah, what I would say is that we deal with the civil elements. So the police may charge an individual, and then that would really be the criminal side of things. And we focus on the civil aspects. So we are concentrated on obviously the value of the claim and an award for compensation for an individual.
I think what is also highlighting, but obviously we have no impact on, is that the criminal justice system and the awards or the penalties that potentially are handed out to them in terms of fines or points are not often very significant, and as such don't tend to act as a deterrent in relation to poor driving. Okay, any further questions? Madeline, I noticed your other comments. We will come back to you in relation to that. So thanks for that. And really, Zara, there's other people just saying thanks for that. Interesting and well presented. Need to go on another web meeting. Right, okay. So let's leave it there unless there's any other further questions. Of course, you can always contact us at any time, any questions you have, and we'll be delighted to answer them. So if I could just thank Zara, thank everybody for joining us tonight, and thank Zara for an interesting presentation. Look forward to seeing you perhaps next week when Jodie's going to look at the more catastrophic type nature of cases. And that will probably be wrapping up the webinar series at that point, but we will see. There might be something thrown in at the end for everybody to enjoy, testing your highway code knowledge. Anyway, that's for another day. Right. Thanks very much again, and good evening.